Hari Om. Today we will commence with Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, from verse number 50. So, in the previous verse, Sri Krishna has mentioned that the one who leads a disciplined life, performs all actions with detachment, will attain a state of Naishkarmyam Siddhim. This state of Naishkarmyam Siddhim is the state of absolute bliss, where all actions are performed by the devotee being fully absorbed in the state of God realization. In the following verses, the Lord will describe how such a person who is established in this state of absolute bliss conducts himself. This state can be compared to the same description that the Lord gave of a Sthita Prajna. Sthita Prajna in chapter 2, verses 55 to 72, the Lord described this person. Prajna means wisdom, Sthita means one who is established in that wisdom. And the Lord gave us the characteristics of such a person, how he or she interacts with the world. And also similar qualities were given by the Lord in chapter 14, verses 22 to 26, whereby Lord described a gunatit. A gunatit is one who has transcended all the three gunas, sattvic, rajasic and tamasic, and therefore does not act under the influence of any gunas. So the same description is given here of a person who is established in this state of God consciousness. How does this person conduct himself? How does he, what we call, interact with the world? So the Lord says here, addressing Arjuna in verse 50, chapter 18, he addresses Arjuna as Kaunteya, meaning Arjuna. Tatha, that process, yatha, by which one who has prapta, one who has attained. So going through the processes of karma yoga, surrendering all our actions to the Lord, and that results in a state of siddhim, which the Lord talks about here in verse 50. Siddhim here indicates that the person who has gone through the path of what we call selfless action, surrendering all actions to the Lord, and has attained a state of inner purity, inner purification. So the Lord has blessed this devotee with inner purification, and in this devotee, because of the purified mind, there has arisen what we call a yearning for spiritual knowledge. Then the person becomes established in spiritual knowledge. Then what happens? The Lord says, such a person apnoti, attains Brahma, attains the absolute, the supreme consciousness. One will merge with that supreme consciousness. So the Lord says now, Nibodha, understand me from me, Samasena eva. In brief, the Lord says, I am going to describe this nature of this person who has attained that higher state of perfection. Because why is the Lord saying that he will describe this briefly? Because please do not forget that chapter 18 is actually a summary of all the points that have already been covered in the chapters from 3 to 70. So chapter 18 is a summary of the key points or the key teachings of Lord Krishna. So this path he has already described many times in the past chapters. How one goes from karma yoga, purifies himself or herself, arises a thirst for knowledge, comes to jnana yoga, attains the knowledge of the self, practices meditation, and then merges with the Supreme Brahman. So the Lord says here, what is the culmination of that path? He says, Yaha, which is para, it is the most supreme state Meaning, beyond this, there is nothing else for the devotee to achieve. Once he has merged with that Brahman, that supreme consciousness, while living, at point of death, he will not come back for another birth. So the Lord says this is the most supreme state, because it will lead you to directly to liberation. There is no other goal higher than this. So the Lord says this state is the nishta, or the consummation or culmination of what? Jnanasya, of self-knowledge. So after attaining the knowledge of who we are in reality, when we meditate, we will reach that ultimate state of merging with the Lord. And this, there are many names given to this kind of state. One of the names given is mentioned in the Upanishads as Vidvat Sannyasa, the highest state of renunciation. And the Mundaka Upanishad also says that mentions or describes the nature of such a person with one statement: Brahmavid Brahmeva Bhavati. The knower of Brahman verily becomes Brahman, takes on the same nature of Brahman, which is absolute bliss, absolute peace. Now we come on to verse number 51. So the Lord will, as he said, he was going to briefly describe this process. And in verse 51, he speaks about this state. And he says, what does he say here? Now he talks about the state of Jnana Yoga. And we must understand that Jnana Yoga consists of three parts. That is Sravanam, listening to the teachings of the scriptures; Mananam, reflecting on the words of the scriptures; and Nididhyasanam, which is putting into practice what you have absorbed, and also includes meditation. So, what we call, the Lord is describing this process now in brief. He says, Dhritya, a person who observes all the spiritual disciplines, Dhritya, with fortitude, with strong commitment. How does he observe all these various practices as advised in the scriptures? The Lord says, Niyamya, by controlling, by having an absolute control over Atmanam. Here the word Atmanam means the aggregate body and organs. So this person is a master of his body and his senses. He leads a very disciplined life with commitment. So absolute discipline of body and mastery of all the senses and the body also. When a person has mastery of the senses and the body, he can direct it to the goal that he has chosen in his life. So if he has chosen a spiritual goal, he can attain that goal only when he has mastery over his body and his senses. And the Lord says at the same time, this disciple, how does he live? Tyaktva, by rejecting Shabdadin. Shabdadin means sound. Visayan, objects. By rejecting sound objects. Now, when the Lord speaks about sound objects here, it covers all our interactions. Not only the sound is, our ears interact with sound, but here it covers everything. So our eyes interact with form, our tongue interacts with taste, our skin interacts with touch. So the Lord says he rejects this, what we call sound objects. Now, what does it mean? It means that the scriptures are constantly warning us of the dangers of not being in control of our wandering senses. Why? Because the senses are the gateway to the mind. If we are not careful about disciplining the senses, then we will let a lot of impurities enter into our mind through what we see, what we hear, what we touch, etc. So the Lord says here, he rejects, meaning he is ever mindful, he is ever careful what he interacts with in this world, so that the mind does not get polluted also. So then he says, cha and vyudhasya, he eliminates in that process raga dvesha, attachment and hatred. He does not lead his life through what he likes and what he dislikes. So generally, most of us lead our lives from the point of the mind, the emotional mind. The mind is subject to likes and dislikes. It likes to do what brings it pleasure, and it avoids doing what brings it displeasure. So raga dvesha is very detrimental to our spiritual progress, because when we are attached, then when we have raga, very strong raga attached to something, and that brings us immediate pleasure and joy. But supposing that activity is prohibited by the scriptures, we will still go ahead because strong raga is pushing us towards that. And if we have strong hatred, dvesha, for doing some activity that brings us discomfort, it doesn't seem to have any tangible gains, then even though the scriptures say it is our duty, for example, the scriptures say it is good for us to do dhanam, but we find that to go and do dhanam, to go and do seva, it brings us a lot of discomfort, so we avoid that. So that's why both raga and dvesha become a hindrance on our spiritual goal. So a devotee of God is one who has transcended both raga and dvesha also. Then we come on to verse number 52. So again, describing the nature of this individual, the Lord says this individual, what is his behavior, what is his interaction with the world? Vivikta sevi. Vivikta sevi means resort to solitude. Frequently take to places away from crowds of people. He likes to retreat to a quiet space that allows time for reflection and meditation. In fact, the more a spiritual seeker gets established on the spiritual path, there is an inclination to be more introvert, and the devotee finds joy in spending time alone, reading the scriptures, reflecting on the words of the scriptures, in meditation and in prayer. So, Vivikta Sevi here doesn't mean going and sitting in a cave or in a mountain, but it means basically enjoying quietude and solitude, to spend time on the spiritual path. Next is quality of this realized soul is lagvasi, eating sparingly. Asi, the word lagvasi, asi means to eat, lag means food that is well measured. So eat food that is beneficial to our health and pure and in moderate quantities. So one who does not succumb to the taste of the tongue and just keeps on eating and indulging in all kinds of food. So one who does not overconsume food, because overconsumption of food, as the Lord also told us, is a hindrance in meditation, as it causes lethargy and laziness also. Now again, food, as the Lord has mentioned here, to be disciplined in the intake of food, food is only associated with one sense, that is tongue. So we must also take it to mean that whatever we intake from our eyes, from our nose, from our skin, all this should be moderated. Next quality that the Lord gives, yatha, one who controls speech, vak. Vak is speech. And the discipline or the austerity of speech Lord had mentioned in chapter 17, verse 15. So you can read up there what it means to discipline our powers of speech. Second is kaya, body, which was also already explained in chapter 17, verse 14, and discipline of the manasa, the mind, which was also explained in chapter 17, verse 16. So all these three, the one who controls speech, vak, kaya, body, manasa, mind, who is a master of body, mind and speech. So this is also very, very important also. A practice that is done by one who has reached that state of higher consciousness. So the Lord says this person is in Dhyana Yoga. Dhyana Yoga is meditation. And if you recall, Dhyana Yoga was also the title of chapter 6, whereby the Lord described the process of meditation in detail in chapter 6. So the Lord says here, one who is in Dhyana Yoga meditation, para nityam, ever engage in the process of meditation. So, meaning this person practices meditation daily. It is not taken as a part-time hobby or to pass the time, but one must dedicate time daily to sit in meditation. And then the Lord says, one who has samupashrita, formally taken recourse with a firm vow. What is that vow this person has taken? To lead a life of vairagyam, dispassion, detachment. And this is very important to progress spiritually because one has to make sacrifices. So this spiritual seeker has made a strong commitment not to lead a wasteful life, but to withdraw gradually from worldly attractions and distractions. Not forcefully, but with a clear understanding that all the objects and things of the world have their limitation in giving me real happiness and peace of mind. So the devotee becomes less and less dependent on the world for its happiness and peace of mind. Now, detachment is sometimes wrongly misunderstood as giving up things, giving up all objects, your money, your possessions. No, detachment is mental. Detachment is not that you should not possess anything. Detachment is not that you should not possess anything. But detachment means that nothing should possess you. Nothing should occupy your mind continuously. So one can be physically, you can have everything, but mentally you're not dependent on that object for your happiness or peace of mind. And that brings us to verse number 53. The Lord goes on to give more qualities of this, what we call person, vimuchya, meaning having discarded or having transcended the three gunas. This devotee is not affected by the three gunas. And what are the problems when we are under the influence of the three gunas? That there are certain demoniacal qualities that Lord has mentioned in chapter 16 verse 4, like ahamkara, egoism, balam, power or using force to attain or to satisfy our selfish desires, dharpam, which is pride, intoxication with pride, kamam, desires of sensual and materialistic nature, krodham, anger, and also parigraham, that means having excessive possessions that preoccupy the mind. So the Lord says this person is what we call, he is vimuchya, he has discarded. What has he discarded? The Lord describes here the what we call in verse number 53. Here he describes all the qualities that need to be discarded. That is ahamkaram, balam, dharpam, kamam, krodham, parigraham. He describes 6 things that this devotee has discarded. So as I mentioned, ahamkaram is egoism, balam is power or using force for adharmic purposes, not for good purposes, for adharmic purposes. Dharpam is pride, intoxicated with all the great achievements that we have done, and therefore looks down upon others. He has no humility or gratitude for the Lord. Kamam is desire of sensual and materialistic cravings. Krodham, anger, and parigraham, excessive preoccupation of the mind over the possessions. Next quality is nirmamaha. Nirmamaha is free from minus, meaning identification with the body, identification with possessions, relationships, power, positions, and santaha. The mind is serene, calm, and peaceful. So the Lord is giving us a description of such a realized person. He says, Such a person who has attained all these qualities, kalpate, is fit for what? Brahman. He is fit for Brahman, bhuyaya, for becoming Brahman. So he by natural inclination takes on all the qualities of Brahman, which is Satchit Ananda, absolute bliss, consciousness, eternity. So kalpate Brahma bhuyaya, such a person becomes fit for becoming Brahman. He identifies himself. He does not identify himself as his temporary, perishable body. He only identifies himself as the higher consciousness. And that brings us to verse number 54. Now, Sri Krishna states what is the nature of such a person who has attained oneness with Brahman while living. He says, Brahma Bhuta, one who has become Brahman, one who has attained the state of oneness with Brahman while living. Prasannatma. Prasannatma here means he is pure-minded. He has got absolute purity of mind. What is purity of mind? Purity of mind means tranquility, peace, serene mind, which is a hallmark of a Jivan Mukta. Under all conditions, whatever situations he faces in life, his mind is pure-minded. And this person, na sochati, he does not grieve over what he has lost. Whatever comes, he accepts. Whatever goes, also he accepts. So, na sochati, he does not grieve over what he has lost, because he understands that everything comes to him because of the law of karma. He gets what he's supposed to get, and the time when he has to lose them, he will lose them. So he never has a sense of attachment for anything. At the same time, na kankshati, he does not crave for what has not been attained. So why does he not crave for what are the things he has not attained? Because this jnani, this devotee, has already found inner bliss. He has already attained the state of purnatvam. So he has already attained the state of inner fulfillment. There is no more hankering for him to go and search for external objects to attain his happiness. And then, so the Lord says, he is samaha sarva bhuteshu. He is the same with all beings. He sees that one divinity in one and all. While he recognizes the differences in the actions of different people and deals with the actions accordingly, yet he gives his love and blessings to all equally. So that's the next quality. And the Lord says, such a person, labate, attains mak bhaktim, devotion to me, which is param. This is the highest state of devotion that a devotee of the Lord can attain. So these are the qualities that the Lord is mentioning here also. And in verse 55, the Lord describes the results of reaching such a supreme state. And what is the result? He says the devotee bhaktiya, through devotion to the Supreme Being, abhijanati, knows mam, me, the Supreme Lord. And how does he know me? So here in verse number 55, he speaks about what is the relationship of this God-realized soul with the Supreme God. He says the devotee bhaktiya, through devotion, abhijanati, knows mam, that means me, the absolute all-pervading eternal consciousness, yavan asmi cha, what I am. The Lord says he knows me, yavan asmi cha, what I am, and yaha, who I am. So what do we mean by that? The Lord uses the word here tattvataha, in truth, meaning such a person, a realized soul, is able to worship the Lord in a form. He can sing bhajans and offer flowers to Saguna Ishvara, any form of the Lord. At the same time, he understands that the Lord is all-pervading, eternal. So at the same time, he can worship the Lord as Nirguna Ishvara. So he knows the Lord in totality. If you recall the same thing Krishna said in chapter 7 verse 1, he says, Krishna told Arjuna, when I have imparted this knowledge to you, you will know me in full, in totality, as Saguna and as Nirguna also. So now the Lord says that such a Jivan Mukta who has gone through both Jnana and Vijnana. So these two things are very important. Both Jnana and Vijnana also. So Jnana and Vijnana also are very important here to know. And this is what the Lord had said in chapter 7, which was entitled Jnana Vijnana Yoga. Jnana means knowledge, Vijnana means that knowledge which culminates in wisdom. So the Lord had mentioned that in chapter 7 also. So the Lord says here now, Tatha Nyatva, then having known me, knowing me in essence, that I am the very, what we call the very source, the very support and the very cause of dissolution. In essence, the Lord is everything. He is manifest and beyond manifest. What happens to such a devotee? He says, Vishate, he enters tad anantaram. Immediately he becomes one with me, meaning such a person, upon the fall of this body, does not take another birth. So that means this is the process that the Lord is telling us how one should go through, what are the qualities that one should have also. So this brings us to verse number 56. Now, here in verse number 56, the Lord says, here he speaks about the path the person has followed. He says, what should you do? Sada, always be kurvana, engage in performing. What? Sarva karmani, all your actions. A devotee should never give up the duties and responsibilities, but should always be engaged in performing sarva karmani, all the relevant actions in accordance to your duties, responsibilities. And what should be the attitude when we perform our actions? Mad vyapashraya. Mad vyapashraya means taking refuge in the Lord. So what do we mean by taking refuge in the Lord? It means that first the devotee of the Lord should have complete faith that the Lord is the ultimate source of security. I do not shun or give up the world, but I never depend on the world as my source of happiness and security. Secondly, taking refuge means having full faith in Bhagwan's teachings, in the words of the scriptures. We must follow those teachings diligently. So, this is another important quality. The Lord says, by living in such a manner, discharging all his duties in total surrender to me, a devotee avapnoti attains shashvatam, eternal, avyayam, immutable padam state. Such a devotee, through the process of selfless actions, dedicating all his actions to me, will attain the state of what we call the immutable state. So the immutable state here means, of course, he's talking about moksha or liberation also. And how will such a devotee attain this state? The Lord mentions here in verse number 56. So the word he uses here is mat prasadat. So mat prasadat means through my grace. It is the prasadam of the Lord. When the devotee follows the teachings of the Lord, surrenders all his actions to the Lord, the Lord blesses such a devotee. So he says, through my grace, the devotee will attain moksha also. And this is what he has said here in what we call in this verse number 56 also. So here, as I said, chapter 18 is a summary of the teachings of the past chapters. So we will be briefly looking at the things that have already been discussed. And Krishna in chapter 18 will highlight the important points of his teachings. So we will stop here at verse number 56 and we will resume in the next lesson. Hari Om Tat Sat.